Everyone, welcome to Maintaining Your Brain Health, a class offered by Alzheimer's San Diego. So here's what we're going to be covering today. First, we're going to talk a little bit more about key factors in healthy aging. Then we're going to go through some symptoms of dementia versus normal age-related changes. We're then going to talk a little bit more about lifestyle factors that decrease people's risk for dementia. And finally, at the end of the program, we're going to talk a little bit more about Alzheimer's San Diego and you, so that if you need services or support from us, we can provide those. So key factors in healthy aging. So as our body ages, there are changes that are normal for all of us. So some of those normal changes in the aging body include muscular changes. We're just not going to be as strong as we once were. Our muscles just don't work as well. They won't be as strong as they were previously. You'll also find skeletal changes. Our skeletons are just not as strong as they were either. And so we are, as we get older, a little bit more prone to possible challenges that happen in our bones or breaks or other things. I think all of us are very familiar with that older people tend to be more likely to have broken bones when they have falls and things like that. And those two things are kind of interrelated. As your muscles and your skeletal systems aren't as strong as they were, it can be hard sometimes if you get in a situation where you lose your balance. And then there can be a little bit more damage to your body. And that is kind of normal, unfortunately, where our bodies are not the same as they were before. We'll also find changes to our cardiovascular system. So when we talk about that, what we mean is changes to your heart and how it pumps blood throughout your body. It's just not going to be as effective as it was when you were younger. And so you are going to see some changes to that. And find that maybe your cardiovascular system just doesn't work as much as it used to. For instance, maybe while you're exercising, you find that your heart rate goes up faster than it used to. You'll find digestive changes. You won't be able to eat and digest the same foods in the same way anymore. And so you will see that sometimes foods that maybe are more difficult to eat for whatever reason, maybe they're too fatty or there's too much salt or other stuff, may have more effects on your body. Again, maybe you get more, maybe it affects your blood pressure, maybe it affects like acid and indigestion and things like that. So yes, I think a lot of us are aware as you get older, when you eat, food doesn't go down, it's not processed as well as it used to be. You also find sensory changes. So you'll find that, for instance, the touch and feel, taste, even, hearing and eyes, smell, they're just, those systems aren't as good as they used to be. As our bodies age, those sensory things will just not work as well as they used to. And finally, you also find that your skin starts to wrinkle and other things. As you age, the moisture in your skin and the elasticity of your skin is not as strong as it used to be. And so over time, you will find that you're just not going to have the same sort of skin. It'll maybe a little bit more dry, and you might see wrinkles developing in places you didn't have them before because your skin's not able to kind of stretch back to the way it used to. So all of these things are normal. There's no way for us to really stop or control these things. And it's okay if some of these things are happening to you because this is part of what happens as we age. And this is just part of the aging process that we all go through. There are also changes to your brain. We were just talking about bodily changes, but what about our minds? So there are physical changes to the brain as you age. It will actually shrink a little bit, I want to be clear, not a lot, but it won't have as much volume as it used to have. There will also be less communication between neurons. Your brain is a whole interconnected series of connections through these neurons and these neural pathways. It's like a whole bunch of like little roads or trains that are interconnecting. And as you get older, they just don't connect as well. So, all of us, for instance, will sometimes feel, oh, as I'm getting older, I maybe don't remember words as easily, or I don't remember where I left my keys sometimes. Those are pretty common changes. Your brain's not working in the same way that it used to. And so that less communication between the neurons is causing some of those changes. And that's okay. All of us start to get like that as we age. And finally, because your cardiovascular system isn't working the way it used to, you'll have reduced blood flow to the brain. Your brain actually eats up a lot of blood. It needs a lot of blood. It doesn't eat it, it doesn't take it away, but it needs a constant push of that through there. And so as your system is not doing as good of a job of that, it's not going to go through there as well as it used to. So just keep that in mind, is that these are physical changes that, again, we can't control. But there are going to be also some cognitive changes. You can have what we just call mild memory decline. As I was mentioning earlier, some things just might be a little bit harder to remember, especially in your short-term memory. So you might find, for instance, again, that you misplace objects a little bit more often, or that you have a harder time remembering somebody's name, especially if it's not somebody you're very familiar with. You might have a harder time, remembering things that happened in a day or something else. Again, these are common. This happens to all of us. In regards to control and maintenance of attention, it is actually harder to keep your attention as you get older. And so do keep that in mind. Is that we get used to at a younger age being able to really focus on things. And you may find as you get older that it's not as easy to do that anymore. And so we want you to just keep that in mind too, is that as you're thinking about it's just harder for me to maintain my attention on something, a TV show or somebody talking, that is again a normal part of aging. And finally, there's just going to be a slower processing of information. So like if you're trying to learn new things, it's a little bit harder, especially if it's something that you've never really tried before. But even with things you're familiar with, it might take a little bit longer for you to be able to process and go through things in ways that felt faster before. And again, this is just because our bodies and our minds are slowing down a little bit as we age. So, what are some of those factors that affect our health as we age? Well, genetics is one of the biggest ones. There are factors that are out of our control that mean that we will age in different ways. Each of us will age differently. And some of us will be very healthy in our earlier life. And then as we age, that just doesn't maintain because of genetics. And sometimes you'll find people who don't seem like they're living what would be considered a healthy lifestyle, but their genetics mean that they live for quite a long time. My maternal grandmother, for instance, smoked and drank almost her entire life, and yet she lived deep into her 90s. It was very surprising to many of us. But that is some of what happens there. Is there's genetic factors that are out of our control in some level. There are also disease risk factors. There are just diseases that affect and shorten our lifespans, whether they're cardiovascular diseases, whether they're things like cancer or other stuff, diabetes. There's all these different diseases that can actually shorten our lifespans. And we're going to talk a lot about today about the need to try and just maintain overall health to try and prevent dementia. In regards to our environment, there are cultural factors, occupational factors, educational factors that have been found to correlate with people's lifespans. So certain cultures and other things due to either maybe lifestyle choices, but also even cultural factors that they can't control means that some people have shorter lifespans. There are also occupational things. So for instance, people who worked in certain kinds of occupations may have shorter lifespans due to environmental factors and things they were exposed to. And finally, educational factors. It has been found that people who are more highly educated live longer, and we don't know all the reasons for that, but some of it may be related to lifestyle and other things that go on. And that's why we offer this classes today. We want to offer some tips about how to address some of those things over time, and including we're going to talk about maybe some of the other kinds of factors that you can control that might be something that benefits you over time and just reduces your risk. And we will be addressing, as I noted in some of the questions that we have here, about things like supplements and things like that, and kind of what we recommend in regards to those sort of things. So really, when we come down to this last one, there are lifestyle controllable factors that do affect especially lowering our risk for dementia and even other kinds of diseases. But this class isn't really about that, by the way. So if you have questions about that, I recommend you talk to your primary care doctor about some of those things, or look at maybe even some more general out there considerations that come from our government or others who have good tips about how to live a long-term and healthy life. So some of those lifestyle and controllable factors, well, one thing that we like to mention is that just for overall health, manage your numbers. So, blood sugar, blood pressure, cholesterol, body weight, these are things that, right, your primary care physicians and health teams are constantly looking at. And that's why there's a lot of evidence that those things, like relate back to long-term health. And so you'll notice that we definitely have, opportunities in our lives to try and kind of manage those sort of things. So pay attention to them. Manage your blood sugar, especially if you have, if your family has a history of diabetes, or if you may be diabetic yourself. Keep in mind your blood pressure. Blood pressure is very much related to the management of our cardiovascular health, cholesterol in terms of what we eat and those sort of things. And in general, just managing your weight, since, it is an issue in the long run. If people are overweight, they tend to not live as long. Also, just overall, it's been found time and time again that stopping smoking is one of the most critical things you can do to try and address long-term health. Smoking cigarettes or even smoking other kinds of things is not really that healthy for your long-term health. It's tied back to a lot of other health factors. So definitely, for overall health, stopping smoking is very critical. Mental health management is also one that, of course, I think is becoming more of a discussion in contemporary culture, but also just something that is related back to how well people manage their health and the long-term overall health that they have. So if you find that you have mental health issues that maybe are challenging your ability to care for your health or just affecting you in general, and those could be things like depression, anxiety, there's a lot of these kind of mental health things that happen. Talk to your primary healthcare teams and see how they can try to provide you support and help so that that way you can try to reduce those factors and maintain your overall health. And finally, address sensory loss. This is one that's not very talked about openly, but there is now research demonstrating that people who are losing their hearing, their risk for getting dementia skyrockets. So really try to address severe sensory loss. If you're finding, for instance, that your eyesight is going away rapidly, or that your hearing is being lost rapidly, or even other senses, make sure to talk to your primary care teams, because that may be something that's going on that's related to other health factors. And again, those may even be directly related back to the possibility that you're developing dementia. And I will say in this slide briefly, the sooner that you get a dementia diagnosis, if that's the case, the more likely you are to have a high quality of life, because you can plan better for the future and have some of the interventions that currently exist try to work with you on that. And if you need more information about that, please take our Dementia 101 program, which dives more in depth about what happens, how people get diagnosed, and also what are some of the factors and things that go along with that and interventions that can happen. So for brain health, this one I think surprises a lot of people. Exercise and movement is very important for your brain too, you know? So definitely make sure that you're still getting exercise, and we'll provide some recommendations for that today. Diet and nutrition also play a factor. We recommend that people have a healthy diet, that are well nourished, and that they stay hydrated. Cognitive activity is one of the most critical ones. And what we mean by that is trying to have your brain to do new things. You know, it means that regardless of your age, trying to do something that maybe is a little bit new or that challenges your brain in ways that it hasn't been challenged before is very healthy for all of us. So keep that in mind as all of us are aging. Think about, how do you continue to challenge yourself? You know, sometimes we hear these little things in popular culture of, take a different route to work so you try something different that day. That's a great suggestion. And think about how you can extend that in other ways, maybe new hobbies and other stuff. We'll talk about more of that in depth in a moment. And finally, it's really critical that you get a lot of sleep and make sure time to relax, and also just, again, overall manage your mental health. But sleep and relaxation are critical to the vitality of your body at any age. So before we come back to some of those lifestyle factors, let's talk a little bit more about the symptoms of dementia and how they're different from these normal age-related changes that we discussed earlier. So our clinical definition of dementia, one that we can share, is a group of symptoms caused by an underlying medical condition that impairs cognitive function and interferes with normal activities. So here's what we mean by that. A symptom is something that is something that we can find in evidence, whether it's seen or tested through your healthcare agency, that is something we can see going on in your body, and then we can find a reason for it. So, for instance, a symptom that comes up pretty often for a lot of us in life is a runny nose. But runny noses can be caused by a number of different things, right? So for instance, like, I could come into the room and have a runny nose because I just caught COVID and I didn't realize I'm not developing symptoms. I could also come to the room and have a runny nose because I have allergies, and so it's just that time of year and it's caught me, and then now that's how my body is dealing with it. I could also have a runny nose because I was eating spicy food, and that is also a way that your body reacts to that sort of thing. So I'm saying that because I just gave you three examples of a runny nose, but they were caused by three different factors, three unrelated different factors, right? So keep that in mind when we talk about dementia. It's an umbrella term for different diseases or changes that are happening in the brain that affect somebody's ability to, engage in the world in a regular way, a way that we're used to. So essentially, it's impairing cognitive function. It's stopping the brain's ability to do what it should be doing. And those changes are severe enough that normal day-to-day activities can't be done in the same way they were being done before. So dementia is a whole bunch of different things. There's frontotemporal disorders, for instance. There's Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome. There's Lewy body dementias. There's mild cognitive impairment. There are vascular dementias. There's all kinds of different dementias out there. But the one that we're most familiar with, the one that most of us probably even had some level of exposure to through maybe a family member or someone else in our lives, is Alzheimer's disease, which is the most common type of dementia and primarily affects older adults, so people over the age of 65. There are forms of Alzheimer's that do appear a little bit younger. And again, if you want more information about those kinds of things, go visit our website to read more about that, or definitely check into our Dementia 101 program, because that has a lot more in-depth information about that. So, but Alzheimer's disease specifically, we don't fully understand all the causes yet, which is why we don't have a cure. There's not even really the medications that are available on the market don't stop the disease. They just reduce the effects for a short period of time and reduce the progress. But Alzheimer's disease specifically, it's a progressive degenerative disease of the brain. It takes away function over time. So if we're looking at this graphic here on the slide, you notice on one side it's noted as a healthy brain, and on the other side is noted as advanced Alzheimer's. And you'll see that difference between the two, right? On one side, we see it's kind of a certain color. The volume is very large. It all seems very full and robust. And on the other side, we start seeing the opposite: smaller volume, discoloration, gaps where there's fullness on the other side. So Alzheimer's is literally taking away our brain. And the way that works is that as it starts to take away those pieces, the brain the brain parts of the brain that regulate these different things in your body are also lost along with that. So for most of us, the most common symptom that we experience with someone who has dementia, and really specifically Alzheimer's disease, is short-term memory loss. Someone who has Alzheimer's, for instance, we would know maybe can't remember names anymore, don't remember your relationship with them, don't always know where they are. Well, that's because Alzheimer's as a disease affects the lower part of the brain first, where your body stores short-term memories before it transfers it off to other parts of the brain. So with that part of the brain being damaged now because of Alzheimer's disease, it's not able to hold on to those memories correctly, and so people are affected with short-term memory loss. However, the disease continues to spread throughout the brain. That's why we call it progressive. It keeps going. And also we call it degenerative because it keeps taking away portions, keeps taking away function. Now, the process of that is unique to each individual, just like a lot of diseases are. So I can't always give you a timeline or other things. Again, that's why we recommend you take the Dementia 101 class to learn more specifics about how that operates. But I'm bringing it up today because what happens is, as people lose function in their brain, they start to lose other abilities, though it starts to interfere with normal activities, as I'm pointing out. So that means maybe, for instance, they can't make their favorite recipe anymore. They decide to wander out of the house even though they're not really sure where they're going. And at the later stages, it can actually really take away people's ability to walk around and move because they can't regulate their body anymore. They're more prone to falls. They may stop talking. They can't swallow anymore. So it continues to take away those functions. So keep that in mind about Alzheimer's, is that it keeps on going. It keeps on taking away those sorts of functions in the mind because the brain is literally going away. And at this stage, we don't have any way of stopping that. The medications that are available can only slow the progress of that degeneration. So now that we have a sense of what dementia is, then how do we start keeping an eye out for this and thinking about how we might help ourselves or somebody else to keep an eye on this and maybe get a diagnosis if we see a severe change? So on the left hand here, we see normal age-related changes. On the right, we see possible symptoms of dementia. And you'll see there's 4 domains or areas that we try to keep an eye out for. So the first one is memory. It was one of the ones we talked about already. So normal age-related changes, like I've kind of brought up, you might have some difficulty remembering names or finding words. You might misplace objects a little more often. This just starts to happen as we get older. However, over on the right there, possible symptom of dementia when it comes to memory, you get lost in a familiar place. For instance, I met somebody during one of our classes not too long ago who got lost at their local gas station, the gas station they go to all the time. But twice now, the police have had to come and help them get escorted home because they didn't know how to get home, even though they were very close to their home, and it's a place they go to quite often. So getting lost in a familiar place, that's a challenge. That's something that might be a sign of dementia. Also forgetting the function of objects. This one is a little bit abstract for those of us who aren't affected until you start working and with interacting with somebody who's affected by this symptom. So what happens is, for instance, somebody might take something that looks like a remote control, so maybe it's like their phone or something else, and pointing at a television and not understand why it's not working. Or for instance, maybe they're in the kitchen and they're using the wrong tool to make the food. And to us, it's like, why would you do that? But of course, because their brain is no longer functioning in the same way it was. It's not connecting and firing in the same ways that it should. They're looking at an object and they don't understand its relationship to the world in the same way anymore. So if you find that you or someone else is using an object in an incorrect way and it becomes consistent, a pattern, that might be a change that is, again, a possible sign of dementia. When we look at the domain of thinking, normal age-related changes, like I was mentioning earlier, you're going to be a little bit slower to learn new things. It's going to just be a little bit more hard. You have to put more effort into it. And also, you may have just changes in attention or concentration. You have to put more energy into trying to focus like that. Possible symptoms of dementia, though, difficulty with planning and sequencing. So let's say you're going to plot out your activities for a day on a checklist and you literally just can't do it anymore. Like you just don't even remember where you started or stopped. It's just not coming together anymore. And that might even be something, for instance, like you can't make your favorite recipe anymore, even though you've done it many, many times. So it's those kinds of things. For instance, maybe you can't balance your checkbook anymore like you used to. You also might find in the thinking domain that you're just not able to learn new things, that you try and try and try and try, and it just will not stick at all, and that no matter how much effort you put in, your brain refuses to really learn that new skill. That may be another possible sign of dementia. And again, something you should bring to your primary care physician, primary care team. In regards to physical changes, we talked about this a little up front, but things like vision, slight hearing, other slight sensory loss is part of normal aging. And also, there's just going to be reduced strength and flexibility across your body. But a possible symptom of dementia, significant changes in what's called visual spatial perception. Alzheimer's especially damages the part of the brain where it processes your sight. And so what happens is somebody with Alzheimer's, their vision goes from this kind of wider view of being able to see things out here to almost like a scuba kind of view where that peripheral vision is lost. And over time, it's just sunk down to a tiny little hole they're seeing through. So if you're finding, especially that you're losing that peripheral vision or you're seeing significant changes in your eyesight that are unexpected, talk to your primary care team and see what they're thinking about that and have them look into that, because there could be other reasons for that change, but it could also mean that it is a sign of some type of dementia, and specifically Alzheimer's. Also, you might start experiencing problems with balance and falls. So your brain regulates all the motion that we do. When you're walking, you're actually kind of controlling a fall forward. And so, as we were talking about, you might see some small changes as you get older, but if you're finding significant changes where you can't manage your balance, where you're falling all the time, because your body's not able to manage it and control those things, those could be more severe situations and really be a possible symptom of dementia. Again, it's because the part of the brain that manages and regulates that is no longer working correctly. So if you're finding that you're having really frequent falls, if you're finding that you can't manage your balance anymore in the same way, talk to your primary care team. And finally, normal age-related changes when it comes to behavior. Behavior changes are just not a normal part of aging. Our personalities and behavior, I'm not saying that they're absolutely static, but it takes an enormous amount of energy and time to change them. And even then, they don't change a whole lot. You'll mostly behave in character for your whole life in certain ways. Possible symptoms of dementia, though, mood or personality changes that weren't there before. So if you knew somebody who used to be very calm, and then suddenly they start flying off the handle in a way they never did before, that could be a possible sign of dementia. Or it could be the opposite. Somebody who used to be very, very, easy to anger and all this stuff, and suddenly they're very withdrawn and they can't communicate in the way they used to anymore. Again, could be a change in the brain that they're not aware of, and that could be a possible sign of dementia. Also, difficulty initiating new tasks. So when given something to start doing, they just can't anymore. And that might be something you notice not just in a workplace or in a day-to-day thing, but it could be because you're caring for somebody who's older and you're finding that as you try to get them to start up something for the day, hey, let's go ahead and let's make food for lunch. Hey, we got to go to the store, we got to go run these errands, and they just can't. They just don't seem to be able to initiate. That may be a reason to take a further look into this. And again, talk to your primary care team. And finally, another one is just social withdrawal. And especially if you're noticing somebody who was highly social before, who now seems to not be able to and can't communicate why, that could be a big reason why, especially because there's still so much social stigma around having any kind of dementia, but especially Alzheimer's. That could be a cause and a driver where somebody is noticing changes and doesn't know how to communicate around it. So keep that in mind, is that people who are socially withdrawing, that might be something. And if they really, again, can't explain it, then maybe there's a reason why, and you want to try and see if there's some further help that they want to get. And maybe it's even for yourself if you're finding that you're concerned about changes you're not fully understanding in your cognitive situation, how your brain operates, how you engage with the world. Talk to your primary care teams about that so that you can get some more help. So what are some of the risk factors for people, that might put them at higher risk for dementia? Well, one of them is age. That's the primary one. Dementia primarily affects older adults. So again, for Alzheimer's, for instance, it's primarily a disease that people get over the age of 65. Now, again, there are forms of earlier onset kinds of dementia, but take our Dementia 101 class if you want more in-depth information there. Just keep in mind, on the whole, people who are more likely to be affected by dementia are older. People who were born as females, that is another one. Just females are, for some reason, at higher risk, and we don't fully understand the causes and reasons yet. So I don't want to get too in depth with that because we do get a lot of questions about that. It could be about culture, it could be about education, it could be about some of those other things we've talked about. We just don't fully know yet. But specifically, even females are even just at higher risk for Alzheimer's disease as a specific dementia. So again, we don't know the causes, but this is a reality. So for those of you who are women out there, please keep in mind you are at slightly higher risk for developing dementia. Genetics is another major factor. If you have a history of dementia in your family, and specifically even as Alzheimer's disease as a specific dementia, then you are probably at higher risk. Even if it's somebody who's not directly or not as directly related to you, like a cousin or something else. For instance, my grandmother had Alzheimer's, and so I am now quite aware that there is a risk of Alzheimer's in my family. So I'm keeping an eye out for my aging father, but I have to keep it in mind for myself, and I have it noted in my medical records that there is a history of Alzheimer's in my family, so that way we can kind of keep an eye on this as I age because it could affect me as well. So keep that in mind. If there's a history of Alzheimer's in your family, genetics is absolutely a predicator of risk. So keep that something that you should always keep in mind. And if you know that that's happened in your family, definitely make sure that it's put into your primary care team's records around your health. There are other health conditions that actually increase risk for dementia. So hypertension, again, high blood pressure, definitely, again, because there are a lot of relationships between your heart, your blood system, and your brain, as we were discussing briefly earlier. So, if those systems aren't healthy, it absolutely increases your risk for dementia. So if you have blood pressure issues and you're not addressing them, keep in mind that really, increases your risk. But if you just have blood pressure issues in general, even if you are taking medications, that does put you at higher risk for the long-term development of dementia. Other kinds of heart disease. So if you know that you have a history of heart disease, or even in your family, that also increases your risk for dementia. They're very interrelated. So keep that in mind, is if you're aware of heart problems that you have, keep in mind that may also lead towards possible, risk for dementia. Type 2 diabetes. There's been a correlation of data showing that people have type 2 diabetes are at much higher risk for developing dementias, including specifically Alzheimer's disease. So if you have diabetes, please keep that in mind. Please maintain it, keep it under check, because managing that will help to lower your risk. And also untreated hearing loss. We don't fully understand the factors in this just yet. There's research being done, but those people who start to lose their hearing, for some reason, their risk for dementia skyrockets, and even specifically for Alzheimer's disease. So if you're experiencing hearing loss, talk to your primary care teams about it, and look into options you can get, like hearing aids and other things to address that, because not addressing hearing loss could lead to a significant risk for other kinds of dementias, including Alzheimer's disease. Also, we know years of formal education seems to be tied back. The people who have less education are at higher risk for dementia, and again, specifically Alzheimer's disease. So, we're not sure the causes here either, but they think that it might have to do with the ability for people who to be able to socialize, to engage in cognitive activities, like we're going to talk about more later. And so I'm bringing this up because if you don't have as much education, that does increase your risk. It may be something where I'm not saying you have to get more educated, but think about other ways you can mitigate your risk. And that's why you're here to take this program today. Head trauma. So for those of you who've experienced head trauma, whether it's through concussions or other kinds of, head injuries, that also contributes to increasing your risk for dementia. So keep that in mind. I think some of us, had heard about some of these NFL players, who would had a lot of concussions and things like that, and how their behaviors changed, how like they weren't able to engage in the world in the same way they used to. Maybe those are forms of dementia because you're talking about people who had serious, like head traumas over and over again during their lives, and again, those brain damages are increasing risks for dementia. So keep that in mind. If you have a history of head trauma for some reason, whether it was through sports, whether it was through an accident that you got in or something else, that absolutely increases your risk. So keep that in mind, and make sure that your primary care teams are aware if they're not aware. And finally, Down syndrome. This is something that not a lot of people are aware of, and sometimes even for people who are caring for those who have Down syndrome. But there is some kind of relationship and they're studying this, but there's a relationship between the genetic causes of Down syndrome that also cause Alzheimer's as a specific disease for people who have Down syndrome. And not only does it happen more frequently with people who have Down syndrome, it also occurs at an earlier age. And we're at a place where we're really caring well for people who have Down syndrome, helping them to live a lot longer. That also means that they're at a really, really high risk for developing Alzheimer's, the specific dementia. So keep that in mind, as if you know someone in your life who has Down syndrome, they're affected by this, then we should be aware that they may be at high risk for Alzheimer's disease specifically, and that we should be taking steps to make sure that they're cared for in the long run, because that will affect their ability to engage with the world in the long run as well. So, but at this point, the National Institute on Aging says there's no definitive evidence yet about what can prevent Alzheimer's or age-related cognitive decline. So I want to be clear about that. You're taking this program today because we're encouraging maintaining high quality health that will help your brain overall. But I cannot say that if you do these things, they'll stop you from developing dementia. However, there is the possibility that it'll just reduce your risk overall. So it's important that we still take care of some of these things, because just good health overall contributes to, lifestyle and other things that will help to reduce your risk in the long run. So what are some of those lifestyle factors that someone might look at so that they can decrease their risk? What are some of the behaviors they can take to try and decrease that risk? Well, activity and movement is one we covered before. It's because, as I've been talking about, your brain and your heart are very tied together. And so movement pumps more blood through your body. So it increases that volume of blood vessels and really pushes that up there. So moving at any age is really critical. Even for those people who already have dementia, it's important to continue trying to exercise and move the body. So that also stimulates the brain's ability to maintain old neural connections and create new ones. So like I was saying earlier, your brain has all these pathways that are interconnected. By moving, by getting that blood flowing, it actually helps to really strengthen those existing ones. It may help to even develop new ones, which is what we're trying to encourage today, is not just that you have a healthy diet and exercise, but also that you really use your brain. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but keep that in mind, that activity and movement helps to encourage the cognitive side as well. It also supposedly raises levels of nerve growth factor in the brain. So research has shown that by doing these kinds of things, that the nerves that exist in your brain that make all these connections will be, their ability to grow is increased when you're getting more exercise, pushing that blood through your body. So activity and movement are very critical to even the physical processes in your brain that help it to stay active and active and continuing to push off cognitive decline. And we recommend, per the national health guidelines, especially from the Heart Association, that everybody should try to get at least 150 minutes of aerobic activity per week. Aerobic activity being something that gets your blood pressure going, or your heart pumping. Something that really helps to kind of get you moving in a healthy way. So not just simple activities, but try to take a brisk walk. Like do other kinds of aerobic exercises that really try to get that up. And again, try to at least get 150 minutes, if not more, per week to really do all this for your body. So in regards to nourishment and food, so all of you have heard healthy food guidelines over and over again. So you're going to be hearing a lot of the same stuff here because it doesn't significantly change here. We do recommend that you eat plenty of vegetables, fruits, whole grains and cereals, legumes. And for those of you who aren't as familiar with that term, we mean beans, lots of fish, because fish has a lot of really strong nutrients in it, and really, healthy fats. So like oils that come from things like olives or other nuts. We also recommend a lot of, like nuts or seeds are also healthy, like good places for healthy fats versus unhealthier fats. Moderate amounts of alcohol, like significant alcohol abuse can contribute to other health problems that can lead to brain problems, which may also increase your risk for dementia. So we highly recommend to use, consume moderate amounts of alcohol. And there's the guidelines around this have been changing, so I don't want to give you specifics, but again, we recommend that you just try to minimize it if possible. Um, Low amounts of saturated fats, dairy, meat, and poultry. Like we do understand that a lot of people consider this very healthy. The wider guidelines are suggesting that fish is a healthier alternative, or legumes in terms of proteins, but that also reducing your overall unhealthier fats. So those like saturated fats are things like fried foods, cheeses. There are some cheeses that are a little bit better, but still that kind of stuff. Just minimizing those sort of saturated fats, and then also consuming the right amount of dairy. We live in a very dairy heavy culture, but we don't as adults need a whole lot of it. So we're not talking about cutting it out necessarily, unless you have a specific health problem that ties to that, and that's something you should be talking about with your primary care team. But keeping these things lower. And look, I'm not trying to recommend that you stop eating French fries forever. Maybe you just try to only have them once a month, a couple times a year, because they're not really that healthy and not contributing to your overall health. And that overall health is really what helps keep the mind going and keeps it strong. And finally, staying well hydrated. Your blood system and all these things will be benefited by you consuming the right amount of water. So make sure that you're staying hydrated, you're drinking water, other things that contribute to your overall hydration. The next one we're going to talk about is cognitive activity. It's really important that we really think about how we engage with the world. So intellectual stimulation may establish cognitive reserve, is what they call it. Like it's almost like your brain's kind of backup of strength, if you will. It's like extra muscle for the brain. So this is the brain's ability to function effectively or compensate when it's damaged. So I'll give you an example. For instance, I used to work with someone who had had a traumatic brain injury, and so they did have a form of dementia. They had a hard time with short-term memory. They struggled sometimes with processes. They couldn't always follow instructions and things like that. They were an employee, so we made accommodations for this, and they were a really good employee. They wrote everything down. They did all these things. Over time, though, because that wasn't a progressive problem in their brain found ways of kind of working around that. So I saw over the course of multiple years that some of these things that I told you about a moment ago improved. Their memory did get a little bit better. They were able to process things a little bit better. They didn't have to write every single little detail down. So it's interesting because there's this elasticity that happens in the brain. And so for us to strengthen that is some of the things I'm talking about. Get exercise, have a healthy diet, make sure that your heart system is really strong, because by also then using your brain, you actually may be building up its own strength in a lot of ways. Now, the brain's not a muscle. I don't want you to think that it works just like a muscle, but using your brain in new and novel ways is going to help it to be strong in its own way. So keep discovering, try to have new experiences or challenges. Even again, if it's just as simple as something as, hey, I'm going to take a different route to work, or I'm going to, try to meet some new people or something like that. Go do something you haven't done before, maybe try going to a place that you've never been to before. And I don't mean that you got to travel to China, but maybe you're just going to, take a little trip out to a part of the county you've never been to before. Maybe if you use public transportation, maybe you're going to try going on the blue line instead of the green line one day just to see what's different. Just try to give yourself some new experiences. That seems to really be strong for the brain. It's something that the research has found is very vital and important. Keep learning. So keep trying to take in new information, try building your skills. One of the best ways you can do that is through hobbies. So either try to continue growing your skills within a hobby that you have, or try picking up new hobbies, even if you're not good at them. You don't have to be good at a hobby for it to be beneficial for your brain. Have fun. Try games, try puzzles. Those are learning unto themselves. I remember this past summer, I was on vacation with some of my family members and they taught me a new game, and it was a challenge to have to learn a new game. I'm at an age where I don't want to have to learn new games, but it was fun once I learned it. And yeah, I had to get over that hump. And again, it was something that helps my brain to be stronger. Music is really critical to this. We don't fully understand the reasons why, but it does very important things for our brain. So listening to music, especially even trying new music, even if you don't like it, maybe you hate heavy metal, but maybe once a month, you just put on a new heavy metal album and you just grind your way through it, but you tried something different. I don't love pop music, but every once in a while, I'll just pop it on to see what it's like. But also like singing, playing music, it has a lot of very positive effects on the brain, even just outside of your risk for dementia. So if you're engaged with music, find more ways to do that. We know that not everybody loves music, but still, if there's a way that you can engage with it, do that more so. And I personally, I love music and I'm very involved. I play music, all kinds of things, but I'm always trying to push myself too because it's a way of pushing my brain. And finally, just choose activities with personal meaning and purpose. If you're forcing to do yourself to do something you don't like to do, it's not really going to feel that great. I know I was joking about heavy metal a moment ago. I don't exactly mean that. If it's just that grinding for you, don't. But like for instance, I really struggle with mathematical based sort of things. This is why I do social services and try to help people through this. I say that because like Sudoku, it's not, I've tried. It's just, it makes me really frustrated and upset. That's not very helpful. I'm not engaging in something I care about. So I have to find other hobbies that I can do. So just keep that in mind, like find ones that are meaningful for you. If it's something you really just don't want to do, don't do them. But if you find those things, keep pushing yourself on them because stimulating your mind in these ways is still very healthy in the long run at any age. You should never give it up. And especially for some of us who are still who are younger, we may be like, well, I'm getting all this kind of cognitive activity through jobs and other stuff, but when you retire, maybe not some of that's going to be there. So always think about, where can I increase opportunities for cognitive activity? And related back to that is social connections. There's been a lot of research and evidence now showing that people who are more socially engaged have lower risks for dementia. And so again, the research has shown that those who have more frequent social activity have better cognitive function. So literally engaging with and socializing with people, very good for your brain. So, and people who engage in regular social activity may have other lifestyle factors that protect them against Alzheimer's disease. So, what do I mean by that? Maybe that they're getting out of the house and engaging in more physical activity because they're doing social things. Maybe it's because they're doing some of those cognitive activities that we're talking about in regards to new hobbies or trying new things, having new experiences. So people who are more socially engaged in the world tend to have better outcomes around these things. And I know that that's not easy for all of us. Like, for instance, I'm actually very introverted and I have a hard time initiating these sorts of things. But socializing is really critical for our long-term health and especially for lowering risk for dementia. So keep that in mind, is that the more that you find ways of engaging in the world, the more healthy you're likely to be. So, again, we don't fully understand all the factors yet, but we do know that socializing is really good. And let's be honest here, we're now pretty deep into a period where we've been really cut off from each other because of not only new technologies, but also because of this pandemic that happened. And so it is time for us to find ways of trying to re-engage with some of that where we can. And if you have health and lifestyle factors that keep you from being able to do some of that in person, because we understand some people have very high risks for all kinds of diseases and being out in public. Maybe there's other ways you can find to socialize with people. Try to engage with that and engage with new things. So we really appreciate all of that. And in terms of you considering that, because this is one that sometimes people don't think of, but we recommend as a very, very important part of long-term aging. Sleep and relaxation is also one of the most vital factors here. So there's a growing evidence that poor sleep may increase risk of Alzheimer's disease. Again, it hasn't been directly connected yet, but they are seeing that may be a strong possibility. So there's kind of a mythology in the world that as you get older, you need less sleep. That's not true. The research does not show that. Our sleep needs do not change dramatically as we age. So anybody at any age needs about 7 to 9 hours required for most adults. So you should be sleeping around that. And we're talking about one chunk. We're not talking about, oh, I get like 8 hours because I take like 4 hours, at night and I do like 4 hours sort of in the afternoon. That's not really what we're recommending. What has been found is you need a nice chunk of about 7 to 9 hours per day, uninterrupted if possible. So we highly recommend that you look into sleep hygiene if you're having trouble sleeping. For instance, I am a kind of a not great sleeper. And so some of the things that really help, and I've tried some of these myself and they have been effective. Create an established routine. Try to go to bed at a similar time every day, but also try to have kind of a similar routine going into that. Maybe, for instance, you turn on a certain set of music that starts kind of, starting to slow you down. Or maybe you like to go into your bedroom and get onto bed and start kind of working towards that, or reading a book or something else that starts initiating a process towards sleep. This helps to actually train your brain for sleep. So it starts preparing it so it knows, okay, it's time for me to go to bed. So how do I take some of those steps and get there and wind down into it? Also make the room really comfortable for sleep, so make sure that you're thinking about things like lighting, what comfort you need on your bed itself, like in terms of the temperature and all of those things, to make sure that you're really maximizing, what helps not only get you to bed, but maintains that. For instance, they say that having light in the room can actually interrupt sleep, so maybe you need to actually find ways to make sure the lights are all off before you go to bed, things like that. And so maybe it could be, again, you start dimming the lighting, you get into bed, you turn off all the lights except for your desk, the one that's next to your bed. You start reading a book or something. Try not to use your phone because phones can kind of interrupt those sorts of things. And then after, let's say you have 30 minutes of reading time, and then you put your book away, turn off the light, and then you start trying to make that effort. And maybe with consistent habits there, it can actually start to kind of clean up your sleep hygiene, making it so you get into bed and sleep a little bit better. Also, in preparing to go to sleep, try to limit naps. I know that I love naps, but the reality is that naps can interrupt your later sleep schedule. So try to really limit those unless absolutely necessary. Be careful about caffeine because caffeine absolutely disrupts sleep cycles, and alcohol also can affect how well your brain winds down and sleeps correctly. So think about other ways that you can start to kind of cycle down and relax, whether it's again like a book, music, lighting, comfort, whatever else it is, something that helps you to kind of like slow your process down, and it's been found that people that exercise regularly seem to sleep a lot better. So again, we've already been talking about the need to kind of move your body and maintain activity. So, regular exercise can also contribute to better sleep patterns over time. So just after mentioning a lot of those lifestyle factors, I will say that there are different medical conditions that can cause memory or cognitive changes. So even with all these things in mind, you're saying I'm doing all these things, and yeah, I'm still seeing some of that. It could be that it's not related to dementia. There are medications, for instance, that affect your memory, and I will put out there and how your brain works in general. And you'll see that usually, when you pick up a new medication, make sure that you're finding out from the pharmacist what side effects I have because it might have cognitive effects. But I'm also bringing that up because sometimes if you mix medications improperly, so it's really, really important to be careful about what medications you're taking and talking to your doctors and your pharmacists about the interactions they might have. That's a really important part of managing your own medications. Also, depression can affect how well our brain operates. So if you have, depression and you're not addressing it, that also has cognitive effects that you should be aware of. Also, illnesses or infections can affect that. For instance, urinary tract infections can affect how the brain is working. So, and for those people who are older, they're more likely to have urinary tract infections. So that can be another cause. So keep that in mind, is that there are different ones, and some of these are actually kind of treatable if you think about it. So for instance, if it's an improper medication mixture that's causing a cognitive change, if those medications are shifted, the cognitive change may go away. So just always be mindful of that there's a lot of factors in regards to how your brain is operating. We're trying to give you some lifestyle tips to make sure that you're maximizing its overall health, but also keep in mind that there's other factors here that might affect that. But if you ever have any concerns about anything that we've talked about, talk with your healthcare provider. Go to them and say, here's what I'm experiencing. I got lost in a familiar place. I'm having a really hard time with short-term memory. People are telling me that I'm forgetting things that should be very obvious. And trust those people around you to also help you to report back to your healthcare team so that way you can get help, because as I mentioned earlier, the earlier you can get a diagnosis, the more likely it is that you can get the kind of help that you need. And that's one of the challenges we have in our community, is that sometimes by the time people get help, they're already at a point where it's really hard to get the further support. So the earlier you address these things, the better. Share your concerns with others if they're coming up. Make sure that other people around you are aware, especially because when it comes to memory loss, you might start seeing that you can't remember as much, and you might not go get the follow-up you need, and maybe they can help you. So if you're feeling like, hey, I'm seeing changes that are really out of character, I took this class and it sounded like some of these are things that shouldn't be happening to me, talk to other people about it too so they can support you and make sure you get the care you need. You can do a memory screening. So lots of organizations around San Diego, for instance, Sharp Healthcare, a number of medical research groups like Pacific Research Network, and then also including Alzheimer's San Diego, we offer free memory screenings as part of the work that we do. So if you want to get a baseline understanding to where your memory is at, and then get tested every 1 or 2 years to make sure you're kind of measuring that, you can work with organizations like ours to do that. So if you need more info, we'll talk a little bit more about memory screenings at the end, but keep that in mind. You don't also have to go through us. There's a number of organizations around town that can help you with that and get you at least some kind of understanding of that, including that if you don't get the results you're hoping for, maybe that'll help you to go take action with your primary health team. And finally, if that all moves forward, try to get a diagnosis. And if you're really concerned, again, talk to the healthcare provider, tell them what your concerns are, and see if they can start setting you on the path for that. Because some people in the community think that, oh, well, you just talk to your doctor and they figure it out. There's actually a number of steps to getting diagnosed for dementia because, as I mentioned before, dementia is an umbrella term for a whole bunch of changes that can happen in the brain that affect those things. We're talking about symptoms, not causes. So, for instance, if you have Alzheimer's, they don't just decide you have Alzheimer's. There's a number of tests they have to do to lead towards that diagnosis. So the sooner you start that process, the sooner you may be able to get a diagnosis and then take certain steps that you're going to need to take. And if you're ever concerned about, well, what happens next if I get a diagnosis, we have our Dementia 101 program, as I mentioned a couple of times. There are also videos of that here on our website if you want to check that out. But then there's also two other programs called Living with Memory Loss and How to Talk About Memory Loss that cover about kind of what the journey is like. But then also, if you get a diagnosis, how do you communicate it? How do you think about that? And what are some of those next steps? And those are good starting programs for understanding what might happen and some of the things you're going to have to start taking into account once you have a diagnosis. So if you need more information about these specific diseases, we recommend that you check out some of these websites. There's a whole lot of disease info on there, especially these government websites have a really, really great overview of a lot of these things. So these will be included in the slides we send out afterwards. And also I want to throw out there that down here at the bottom, there's this UCLA Alzheimer's and Dementia Care Program. Like us, UCLA does a lot of work to support caregivers and people who are affected by dementia so they have a high quality of life. And so that's a great site to go to also build some understanding about not only why the diseases happen and what the diseases are, but also what's the healthcare journey that goes along with that and what's the caregiving journey. Because somebody who has dementia needs a lot of help on a day-to-day basis. And for people who have, for instance, late stage Alzheimer's, they need help 24/7, basically. They need constant care. So this is a good way of starting to get some more of that information. They have wonderful videos that explain a lot of that stuff and provide a lot of support and understanding around that, as do we. So, we're here as a local regional organization. We just work within San Diego County. So all the money that comes into our organization is only spent here in San Diego. And so I want to talk a little bit about Alzheimer's San Diego and you. So we don't require a diagnosis. We do not require any kind of health insurance or anything else. Everything we do is free. And so here, looking at this wider graphic that I have up, if you need to reach us, you can find us at our website, alzsd.org, or you can give us a call at 858-492-4400 to learn more about what I'm going to talk about with these services, but also next steps you can take if you have questions. So in regards to social activities and outings, as you heard me say, socializing and connecting with people is important at any stage of your life, including even if you have a diagnosis of dementia. I want to be clear again, we don't require a diagnosis to participate in our programs, but I'm saying if somebody gets diagnosed, don't think that their life is over. They still need to be socially engaged as well too. So we offer all kinds of activities and outings here at our office, but also throughout the community so that a caregiver and their person living with dementia can come together, meet new people, get a chance to try something new and different in the community, whether it's like visiting an animal shelter or a center, I'm sorry, not shelter, animal center, or maybe, doing dancing together or doing physical activity here at our office or listening to music together and playing music together. There's all these ways that we can engage still. So we offer a lot of free programs like that, again, throughout the community. We also offer free education and training. You're taking one of those classes right now. We also train people in the professional community. We train law enforcement. We do a whole lot of work. Those programs are available online and in person. We also offer programs in Spanish. So if you know anybody out there who's affected, who needs to get more info, or you want to build your skills around how to plan for the future or how to care for someone who has dementia, please take more of our education programs. And again, some of you may have seen, that's why we're recording this program right now, we put these programs up online so that way people have up-to-date information. We also support local research. We try to engage making sure that the local research groups like UCSD and some of these other big groups that are here that are trying to advance and find a cure or other kinds of medications or other things, solutions for Alzheimer's and other dementias. are getting people enrolled in that. And San Diego is a hotbed for this sort of thing. So if you're interested in learning more about clinical trials that might be able to support you or someone else and finding out more about that, visit our website because we have a listing of all the local clinical trials that we are supporting. And also, if you need more information about that, you can give us a call and we can try to help you understand kind of how those clinical trials work and if it's maybe a right fit for you. You heard me say it earlier, but I'll repeat it again. We do memory screenings. They're all free. So again, you just have to call us and get signed up for those. So again, it's a one-on-one meeting you have to do in person, just to be clear about that. We do offer a location in North County at San Marcos that we can also do them at, but we do need to do them here at our office. That's because of the way that these things are implemented do need to be done in person. They cannot be done online, but it can help you to get a baseline or an understanding of where your cognition is at, and then to help you to take some steps around what you'd like to do next. And you can even talk to one of our staff who can give you some advice about what you might want to do with those results. Again, those results are private, by the way, because if you do them through us, we're not a medical organization. We just tell you the results, but we do not, share those with any other thing. So if it's also a softer landing for you to maybe get that done here, or maybe someone else in your life to have us do it, maybe that's a great way of getting it done. We also have this great program called Vitals, which stands for Volunteers in Touch. It's a volunteer-based program where we match a volunteer with somebody who is living alone who has dementia. Because there's a lot of people in our community who, live alone, are affected by dementia, and don't really have somebody in their life or many people in their lives to support them. So our volunteers can call them, have a conversation, socialize with them, so they still have a connection to the world, even if they're not able to get out of the home as much anymore. So it does take a little bit of time for us to connect a volunteer to somebody who is in a situation like that. So if you know someone like that, or maybe you're affected yourself, give us a call and try to enroll in it soon so we can start that process of matching you with a volunteer. We have support groups. I would argue this is maybe the most important thing we do in this organization. We have in-person and online support groups, and they're throughout the county. So wherever you live, hopefully there's one that's not too far from you. This is a great way to really meet other people who are caring for someone who has dementia and be able to commiserate, and also just find ways of working and solving problems around how you care for someone like that. We do have a couple that are for people living with dementia, especially those in the early stage. So check our website if you're looking for a more in-depth description of all the different ones that we offer, what the frequency, and also where they're located, so you can try to find one that maybe works for you. We also have this great respite program. Anybody who's caring for someone who has dementia needs a break sometimes, and so respite is there for that. So it's called ALZ Companions, All's Companions. And so it, similar to Vitals, is a volunteer-based program. So it does take us a while to make a match. So I do want to say that if you're kind of in a crisis situation where you need somebody immediately, we're not able to provide that. But that said, for those of you who have a little bit more of a timeline, we try to establish and connect a volunteer with the household, one that works well for the family and the caregivers themselves, one that works well with the person who is living with dementia, and also well for the volunteer themselves, to build a relationship so they can come into the home on an ongoing basis and provide social stimulation to the person who's living with dementia and keep an eye on them for a little bit. To be clear, they're not home caregivers. They can't do the more advanced stuff. They can't issue medications or any of that stuff. But they're there to socialize and give this opportunity. And then the caregiver has a break. And so again, this does take a little while to make a match. So if this is something that would be helpful to you, please call us soon to get enrolled in the program so we can start that process for you. And finally, up at the upper left-hand side, there's the most important thing you can do about everything I'm talking about and even more. If you're ever in a situation where you're like, I just don't know what to do here. I took this maintaining your brain health class and I'm kind of concerned that maybe I am developing dementia, give us a call. And that can be for any of your concerns, whether you're caring for somebody, whether you think you might have dementia, whether you want to know more about these programs, if you have other questions related to that, because our team is really up to date on all the research, all the kind of caregiving tips, and they can give you some one-on-one unique advice. Because the reality is that everybody's journey with dementia is different. And that also includes the people who are helping to care for them. And we all need ways of getting support. We need ways of building our support team, of having the right information so we can take the right steps, and even having the skills to help care for somebody else or even care for ourselves, which is part of the reason you're taking this class today. So if you're in this situation, give us a call, because our team is here on the phones from 8:30 to 5, Monday through Friday, so you can give us a call. If you call outside of hours, you can always leave us a voicemail message and our team gets back to those very rapidly. You can also visit our website and find a page called Talk to a Dementia Expert and submit a form through that. So if that's easier and you prefer to either get an email or just get a call back, that's another way that you can reach out to us. So again, if you ever have questions, you are going to have questions that are very unique to you, then feel free to give us a call, connect with us, or reach us through our website so you can get more info and we can provide more support to you.